Dear listeners, thank you for your incredible support in helping our channel grow. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, so please support us by subscribing and helping us reach this milestone. Now let's start the story. My name is Grant Lawson. I'm 46 years old, a successful account manager for a major manufacturing firm. I've been married to Lydia for 25 years. We were high school sweethearts, best friends since 4th grade. Together, we built a life that anyone would call the American dream. A big house by Lake Arlington, a daughter we adore, and financial stability that most can only dream of. But let's go back. Lydia, her full name is Lydia, is a graphic designer at a prestigious advertising agency. Even after all these years, she still knows how to turn heads. Blonde hair, striking blue eyes, and a figure that somehow defies time. She's always been the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes people notice. And me? I was proud of that. Proud that she was mine. Or at least, I thought she was. We grew up on the same street in Fort Worth, Texas. By the time senior prom rolled around, we were inseparable. We went to the University of Texas together, sharing a tiny one-bedroom apartment. We were broke college kids, but we made it work. Those were the good times, the kind that made us feel invincible. I remember one night when the power went out in our apartment, and we sat on the floor, eating peanut butter sandwiches by candlelight. "This is so romantic," Lydia had joked, taking a dramatic bite of her sandwich. "Oh yeah, nothing says romance like no air conditioning in the middle of a Texas summer," I laughed. She grinned. "At least we already know how to live together. Think we'll survive marriage?" I kissed her on the forehead. "No doubt about it." And we did. We got married right out of college, and a few years later, we had Lena. She changed everything for us in the best way. Our only child, our pride and joy. She's 21 now, studying at the University of Oklahoma. And recently, she got engaged to Orion. Orion is a solid guy, comes from a wealthy family, treats Lena like gold. He sat me down before proposing, nervous but determined. "Mr. Lawson, I love your daughter, and I want to marry her," he said, clearing his throat. "I promise to take care of her." I studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You'd better. Because if you don't, you and I are going to have a problem." He laughed nervously, but I could tell he understood. He's a good kid. Honestly, we couldn't have asked for a better match. From the outside, life was damn near perfect. Financially, we were more than fine. Lydia earned 6 figures at her agency, and my salary as an account manager cleared $500,000 annually. About 15 years ago, we bought a foreclosure property near the lake for $350,000 in cash, fixed it up ourselves, and turned it into our dream home. Today, it's worth over $2 million. Between that and our retirement funds, we were sitting pretty comfortably. That comfort made what happened even harder to see coming. For years, Lydia and I had a routine. We ate breakfast together every morning, talked about our days at night, and made time for date nights when we could. It felt stable. She'd tell me about work, her coworkers, her deadlines, and I'd share my wins and stresses from managing multi-million-dollar accounts. Nothing extraordinary, but it worked. Or so I thought. Looking back, there were small cracks. Tiny moments when she seemed distracted or too tired to talk about her day. I noticed, but I brushed them off. I trusted her completely. We had 25 years of marriage and a lifetime of memories. She wasn't just my wife. She was my partner, my teammate. That's why, when she casually mentioned the company party and gave me an easy out, telling me I didn't need to come, I didn't think much of it. "It's this Friday at the Crescent," she said one evening over dinner. She barely looked up from her plate as she pushed a piece of salmon around with her fork. "Oh yeah? The usual crowd?" I asked. She nodded. "Same people, same schmoozing. Nothing exciting. You don't have to come if you're busy." I frowned. "Are you sure?" "I don't mind." She gave me a small smile, almost dismissive. "It's really not a big deal, Grant. You don't need to come." At first, I didn't think much of it. But then she brought it up again. And again. Each time, her words were kind, casual even. But the message was clear. "Grant, you don't have to go." Something was off. And for the first time in years, I felt it. That was the start. That party invitation, that dismissive suggestion, it was the spark that lit the match. I didn't know it then, but everything I thought I knew about my life was about to be tested. Saturday night came, and I was determined to go. Lydia looked stunning. More than usual. She wore a tight black dress that hugged every curve, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her blue eyes somehow brighter than ever. She always knew how to dress for a crowd, but tonight it felt calculated, like she was putting on a show. "You sure you're okay with me tagging along?" I asked as she put on her earrings. She turned to look at me in the mirror, smiling slightly. "Of course, Grant. I just didn't want you to feel obligated." "Obligated?" I repeated, watching her. "It's a company party, Lydia. It's normal for me to be there." She held my gaze for a second too long before turning back to her reflection. "Right? she murmured, smoothing her dress. We arrived at the venue, and the first thing I noticed was how everyone seemed to know her. I mean, Lydia has always been the social butterfly between the two of us, but there was something different about the way people looked at her tonight. Polite smiles that lingered a second too long. Glances exchanged that felt loaded with meaning. And then there was him. Before I could even ask Lydia where we should start, a man, probably in his early 50s, gray-haired but fit, walked straight up to her. His confidence was unsettling. "Lydia," he said smoothly, his voice deep, assured. She smiled warmly, extending her hand to him in a gesture that felt intimate. Like this wasn't just some colleague. "Damon," she said, her tone soft, familiar. Then, almost as an afterthought, she turned to me, planting a quick kiss on my cheek. "Grant, this is Damon Langston, one of our advertising sales reps." Damon. The name stuck in my mind like a splinter. I tried to be polite, but something about him rubbed me the wrong way. His smile was too easy, his laugh too rehearsed, and the way he looked at Lydia, it wasn't professional. There was familiarity there, something unspoken but undeniable. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only one in the dark. We spent the next hour mingling, having drinks, but I stayed sober. I told Lydia it was because I was driving, but the truth was, I needed to keep my head clear. I started paying attention to everything. How often Lydia glanced in Damon's direction. How close they stood when they talked. The subtle touches on her arm that lingered just a second too long. It got worse when we hit the dance floor. Lydia and I had always enjoyed dancing together, but that night, she seemed distracted. Every time I spun her, her eyes darted across the room. At first, I thought she was just scanning the crowd, but then I followed her gaze. Damon. He stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching us with a smug grin. He wasn't just looking, he was daring me. My grip on Lydia's waist tightened slightly, but she didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and just didn't care. Then came the breaking point. After a few songs, we sat down at our table to catch our breath. I was just about to say something, anything to break the tension, when Damon walked up to us. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't glance in my direction. He looked straight at Lydia, as if I didn't exist. "Dance with me," he said smoothly. "Now would you like to dance? Not may I have this dance." A statement, an expectation. My hands clenched into fists under the table. The arrogance of it, the sheer disrespect, made my blood boil. Lydia must have sensed how close I was to losing it because she smiled sweetly at him and said, "All my dances are reserved for my husband." For a moment, I felt relief. Pride, even. But then I saw it, the flicker of anger in Damon's eyes. It was quick, controlled, but it was there. This wasn't over. Later, Lydia got up to get another drink, and I watched her from across the room, my nerves on edge. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. Something was wrong. And then I saw him. Damon approached her again, this time with no audience. Their conversation was quieter, more intense. Lydia's expression shifted, soft, almost pleading. Her lips moved just enough for me to make out the words. "I'm sorry, darling." Darling. The word echoed in my head, sharp and cutting. I stood there frozen, every alarm in my mind blaring. Who the hell was this man to her? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I barely spoke, barely moved. Instead, I watched. I observed every interaction, every glance, every whisper. It was clear to me now, something was going on. And everyone in that damn room seemed to know it. People watched us. Watched me. Their eyes held something I couldn't ignore, pity. Like I was the last person to figure out a cruel joke. When we finally got home, I didn't even wait for Lydia to get inside. I turned off the car, gripped the steering wheel for a second to steady myself, then turned to her. "What is going on between you and Damon?" My voice was calm. Too calm. I felt like if I let even a sliver of emotion slip through, I might lose control completely. Lydia sighed, exasperated, like I had asked her something ridiculous. "Grant, seriously? Nothing is going on. Damon is just a coworker." Her tone was too even, too measured, like she had rehearsed this already. I studied her, searching for a crack in her composure. "I don't believe you," I said finally. She rolled her eyes. "You're being paranoid." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in my gut told me otherwise. That night, she lay next to me in bed, her breathing slow, steady, pretending to be asleep. And I just stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I needed answers. And I wasn't going to stop until I got them. The days after the party were tense. Lydia acted like everything was normal, like I had imagined the whole thing. She smiled, laughed at my jokes, even made my favorite meals. But I couldn't shake the images from that night. The glances, the whispers, the way she had said "I'm sorry, darling." It was eating me alive. Words could be twisted, dismissed. I needed something undeniable. So I did what any man in my position might do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Caleb Jones, a no-nonsense guy who came highly recommended. When we met, I laid everything out on the table, not holding anything back. I need to know, I said, my voice hoarse. If something's going on between them, I need to know for sure. Caleb nodded. I'll find out. He didn't waste time. Within a week, the first updates started coming in. The first set of photos hit me like a punch to the chest. There she was, my wife, walking into a motel with Damon. They looked casual, comfortable, like this was routine. Another photo showed them in the parking lot, kissing, completely oblivious to the world around them. I told myself to wait, to let Caleb gather everything before I confronted Lydia. I needed the full story. And over the next few weeks, the evidence piled up. More photos, video footage, even audio recordings. It was worse than I had imagined. They weren't just sneaking around during lunch breaks. This was a full-blown affair. Caleb's recordings made that painfully clear. Lydia spoke so casually about it, laughing about their office wife arrangement, as if it were some harmless little joke. The hardest part is keeping a straight face around Grant, she had said in one clip, her voice light and carefree. He would never suspect. He's too busy with work to notice. That stung. She had underestimated me, written me off as some clueless fool. When Caleb handed me the final report, I sat in my car outside his office for what felt like hours. I flipped through the pages, staring at the photos, reading the transcripts, letting the weight of it all settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. Lydia had been living a double life, and everyone around her knew. Everyone except me. That evening, I came home and acted normal. Lydia greeted me with a smile, asked about my day, and moved around the house like she had nothing to hide. I watched her closely, every move, every word. It was infuriating how good she was at pretending. The next morning, I decided it was time. Over breakfast, I placed the envelope on the table. Lydia, I said, my voice calm. You would never betray me, right? She froze, her fork hovering midair. Of course not, she said quickly, her tone defensive. Why would you even ask that? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into the envelope, pulled out the first photo, and slid it across the table. She stared at it, her face draining of color. Then I laid down another. And another. With each one, her expression shifted from shock to panic. Grant, this is not what it looks like, she stammered, her voice trembling. I didn't blink. Then tell me, I said coldly, what exactly does it look like? She opened her mouth, closed it again. Then, in a desperate whisper, she said, I don't love him. It's just physical. It doesn't mean anything. I leaned forward, my voice like ice. It means everything to me. And that's when the excuses came pouring out. How it was just a fling. How she never stopped loving me. How she thought I would never find out. None of it mattered. I had the proof. And there was no going back. That moment, sitting at the table with the woman I had loved for 25 years, I felt something inside me shift. The trust was gone, shattered into pieces I knew could never be put back together. If finding out about Lydia's affair wasn't bad enough, what happened next cut even deeper. After our confrontation at breakfast, things were tense in the house. Lydia kept trying to apologize, kept trying to explain, but every word she said only made me angrier. It was a mistake, she kept saying. It doesn't mean anything. A year-long affair, and she wanted me to believe it was meaningless. I couldn't take it. I needed space. So, I threw myself into work, trying to clear my head. Then Lena called. My daughter. My pride and joy. No matter how bad my day was, hearing her voice had always been a bright spot in my life. So when her name popped up on my phone, I thought maybe this was exactly the distraction I needed. Hi, sweetheart, I said, trying to sound normal. But the moment she started talking, I knew something was wrong. Daddy, she hesitated. I just talked to Mom. She's really upset. She said you kicked her out of the house. What is going on? My heart sank. I hadn't kicked Lydia out. Not yet, anyway. But it was clear she had already started twisting the narrative. I took a deep breath and explained everything. I told Lena about Lydia's affair. About Damon. About how it had been going on for over a year. Her response knocked the air from my lungs. Dad, it's not a big deal. I thought I misheard her. Not a big deal. I repeated. Lena, your mother betrayed me. She lied to me for a year. She sighed, like I was the one being unreasonable. Dad, it's the 21st century. People have affairs. It happens. Men do it all the time, and no one makes a big fuss about it. I clenched my jaw. My voice was sharp when I responded. I never did that to your mother, I snapped. I never betrayed her. Not once. Her tone shifted then, defensive, almost condescending. Well, maybe you should have, she said. Maybe you wouldn't be so worked up about this. I gripped the phone tighter. Lena, Dad, you need to let it go and let Mom come home, she interrupted. She's your wife, and she loves you. I sat there, gripping the phone, my chest tightening. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own daughter was siding with her mother, acting like I was the villain for being hurt. It felt like a betrayal on top of a betrayal. But somehow it got worse. By the way, Lena added it so casually, like she was telling me about a new restaurant she liked. I didn't see it coming. I know Damon, she said. He's a great guy. Mom and I were talking, and we think he should come to the wedding. My entire body tensed. What? My voice was louder than I intended. What did you just say? He's important to Mom, Lena continued, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And honestly, I like him too. If Mom wants him there, he should be part of the day. Maybe he could even walk her down the aisle with you. I was done. I inhaled sharply, forcing my voice to stay calm, but the coldness in it was unmistakable. If Damon is at your wedding, Lena, I said, then I will not be. There was a long pause. Then she scoffed. Dad, you're being ridiculous. No, I replied firmly. You want Damon there? Fine. Let him play father of the bride. Because I won't. I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with rage. Lena, my Lena, the little girl who used to hold my hand at the park. The teenager who called me at midnight because she had her first heartbreak. The woman I had supported in everything. Her college, her career, her wedding. Now she was throwing me under the bus to defend her mother and some guy she barely even knew. That night, Lydia tried to talk to me again. She came into the bedroom, tears streaming down her face, her voice thick with emotion. Grant, she sobbed, please. I want us to fix this. I stared at her, unmoved. But then she kept going, and her next words shattered any remaining trace of the woman I once loved. I want to fix us, Grant. But I also want to keep seeing Damon. You need to accept that. I let out a slow breath. My entire body felt numb. Lydia, I said quietly, my voice calm in a way that scared even me. You need to leave. She didn't. Not yet, anyway. But in that moment, something inside me broke. My wife, my daughter, they were not the people I thought they were. And for the first time, I realized I was on my own. By the time Lydia told me she wanted to work things out while still keeping Damon in the picture, something inside me flipped. That was the moment I knew I was done, not just with her, but with the entire life we had built together. Our marriage, our home, our routines, even our dreams. It was all a facade, but I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed. If Lydia and Damon thought they could humiliate me and walk off scot-free, they were in for a surprise. I started planning in secret. Years of managing accounts had taught me how to think strategically, and this was no different. First, I needed to secure my finances. Lydia may have been good at graphic design, but when it came to money, she left all of that to me. She had no idea how our investments were structured or how much of our assets were liquid. That gave me the upper hand. Step one was to move everything I could. I transferred a substantial chunk of our savings into an offshore account under a name she could never trace. Then, I took out a loan against our house, a hefty one. Lydia had always bragged to her friends about how we owned the house outright, but that was never true. Sure, we had paid off the original mortgage, but refinancing for investments was a common move for me. She just never bothered to ask. Once the loan was approved, I moved on to the next piece, her car. Lydia loved that BMW, acted like it was some symbol of her success. In reality, it was just another asset waiting to be leveraged. It was worth around $45,000, but I managed to secure a loan of $440,000 against it. Every single dime went straight into accounts she would never see. The debt? All in her name. I worked on this quietly for weeks, using every spare moment to finalize my plan. Meanwhile, I acted like I was moving past the betrayal. I told Lydia we could try to fix things. She looked at me, eyes hopeful, almost smug, like she had won. Oh, Grant, she breathed, wrapping her arms around me. I knew you'd come around. I held her for just a second, just enough to make it believable, then stepped back. I just need time, I murmured. We've built a life together, right? She nodded quickly, gripping my hands. Yes, and I know this is hard, but you'll see. We can make this work. I smiled. Of course. Little did she know, every day she spent at Damon's motel was another day I got closer to pulling the rug out from under her. At work, things were lining up perfectly. The company was undergoing a merger, and as part of the restructuring, they offered me a buyout package, over $500,000. I accepted it without hesitation, arranging for the funds to be wired directly into my offshore account. Then came the next piece. Lena's dream wedding, canceled. I picked up the phone and called the wedding planner. Mr. Bennett. She greeted me cheerfully. I have the final breakdown of costs. Stop right there, I said, my voice clipped. I won't be paying for anything. There was a long pause. I'm sorry. You heard me, I said. Lena has made her choice, and I've made mine. If she wants a wedding, she can ask her other dad for help. But, good luck, I said flatly, and hung up. The planner was stunned. But I didn't care. If Lena wanted to side with Lydia and Damon, she could deal with the fallout. Finally, I needed Lydia to sign off on some documents without realizing what they were. I created fake life insurance policies and convinced her they were part of a new company program. One night, after a few glasses of wine, I brought the papers to her and casually slid them across the table. "These are just some new policies from work," I said smoothly. "It's part of a corporate benefits package. Nothing complicated, just a formality." She was already tipsy, her fingers lazily tracing the rim of her wine glass. She hummed. "Do I have to sign them now?" "It's just easier to do it all at once," I said, keeping my tone light. "We'll need to get them notarized later, but signing now saves time." She sighed dramatically, grabbing the pen. Fine. You always handle this boring money stuff anyway." She didn't read a single word. Her signature sealed the deal. The whole process took about 2 months, but by the end of it, I was ready to disappear. The house, the car, the debts, they were her problem now. The bank would come knocking soon enough, but by then, I would be long gone. The hardest part was keeping a straight face every morning. I sat across from Lydia at the breakfast table, listening to her chatter about her plans for us. Every word out of her mouth was a reminder of how far she had fallen from the woman I once loved. "I was thinking," she said one morning, stirring her coffee, "we should take a trip. Maybe Europe? Just the two of us. A fresh start." I nodded, smiling slightly. "Sounds nice." She beamed, completely unaware. I was counting down the days. On the last day, I handed in my company badge, packed a bag, and walked out the door without looking back. By the time Lydia realized what had happened, I would be a ghost. She thought she had played me, but she had no idea I had been 5 steps ahead the entire time. When I finally walked away, it felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a smoke-filled room. I was free, but I knew the storm was just beginning for Lydia and everyone else who thought they could treat me like a fool. The first crack showed up a week after I left. The loan against the house went through, and the bank wasted no time reaching out to Lydia. She was blindsided. For years, she had lived under the illusion that the house was fully paid off. Now, there was a $2 million debt attached to it, and she had no idea how to handle it. The BMW, same story. The payments started piling up, and without my income, Lydia couldn't keep up. I imagine she called Damon for help, but from what I heard, he had his own problems. His wife found out about the affair, thanks to me, and filed for divorce. She took the house, most of their assets, and even got him fired from their advertising agency. Apparently, she was a major shareholder and pulled some strings. Damon went from being a hotshot sales rep to driving an old, beat-up car for a rideshare company. Meanwhile, Lena wasn't having the fairy tale ending she had hoped for either. After I cut off the wedding funds, I made one last call to Orion, her fiancé. "Grant." Orion answered, his voice uncertain. "What's going on?" "There's something you need to know," I said. "It's about Lena." There was a long pause. "What about her?" Instead of explaining, I sent him the recordings. Lena dismissing the affair like it was nothing, talking about how it wasn't her problem. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Orion's voice was cold. "I can't believe this." "You deserve to know the truth," I said simply. The engagement was over within hours. Orion packed his things and left Lena to deal with the fallout. With no rich fiancé to support her and no father willing to bail her out, she moved in with Lydia. They ended up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town. From what I heard, the place was barely livable, but it was all they could afford after Lydia lost the house and her car. I could have stopped there, but I wanted to make sure Lydia fully understood the depth of her mistakes. I sent copies of the affair's evidence to Damon's wife and Liz's boss. Lydia's reputation at work crumbled, and she was eventually let go. The last I heard, she was working as a waitress at a roadside diner. As for me, I settled in Florida. Fresh start. Warm weather. No one to answer to but myself. I bought a truck and a travel trailer, both paid in cash and registered under my cousin's name. My finances were secure in offshore accounts, and I found a great job with one of the big companies down here. Every now and then, I hear bits and pieces about Lydia and Lena. They're struggling, no doubt about it. And Damon? He's just as miserable, but I don't feel sorry for them. They made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. My life now? It's better than I ever imagined. I wake up every day with a clear mind. No lies, no drama. The sun is always shining, and the future feels wide open. I may have lost a marriage and a family, but I found something far more valuable: freedom. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.